Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 3rd of July. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. IDF troops shot and killed a Palestinian teenager this morning who was pelting a military vehicle with rocks near the Kalandia checkpoint between Jerusalem and Ramallah. The commander of the Binyamin Brigade inside the army jeep fired at 17-year-old Mohammed al-Kasbeh, who later died of his wounds. An IDF spokeswoman confirmed the incident, saying that warning shots were first fired in the air after the teenager smashed the windshield of the vehicle at close range, and direct fire was only carried out when he refused to cease, endangering the occupants' lives. Senior Fatah official Rafet Aliain later told Israel Radio that the killing will provoke a reaction from the Palestinian people, and warned that tensions between Israel and the Palestinian Authority are escalating. Security reinforcements already positioned across Jerusalem's Old City ahead of Muslim prayers on this third Friday of Ramadan were further bolstered in and around the capital to deter the outbreak of any potential clashes. The defense establishment is also preparing for any potential disturbances surrounding the first anniversary of the killing of 16-year-old Mohammed Abu Khader, the Palestinian teenager who was burned alive in an alleged revenge attack by Jewish extremists for the earlier murder abductions of 3 Israeli teenagers in the West Bank. Riot police were deployed in force to keep order last night as hundreds of Palestinians demonstrated inside the Shuafat refugee camp in East Jerusalem, where they waved Palestinian flags and held up posters of the murdered teenager. 3 Israeli citizens charged with carrying out the crime are currently standing trial in Jerusalem. The Palestinian Authority arrested more than 100 Hamas members overnight in a series of raids within the West Bank. Officials in Ramallah called the crackdown one of the most expansive to have been conducted by PA security forces since 2007, when Hamas overthrew Fatah for control of the Gaza Strip, leaving Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas only in charge of the West Bank. The PA officials say that they are accusing the Hamas suspects of conspiring to sow chaos, although they failed to provide additional details. A Hamas spokesman retaliated by charging the PA security forces of working for Israel in efforts to counter the recent spike in deadly Palestinian attacks, going on to vow that his group will continue to perpetrate terror attacks against Israelis. Turning to the south of the country, where IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot has temporarily ordered the closure of Highway 12 along the border with Egypt. The precautionary measure went into effect this morning after being approved by the Minister of Defense, Moshe Ya'alon. It comes in the wake of unprecedented violence in the Sinai Peninsula, when terrorists affiliated with the Islamic State launched massive orchestrated attacks that reportedly killed over 70 Egyptian troops. And in a related development, there is increasing suspicion that Hamas is involved in training and arming of those jihadi insurgents operating in the Sinai. Major General Yoav Mordechai, who is the coordinator of government activities in the territories, says that he has knowledge that ISIS operatives were smuggled from the Sinai into Gaza by specific members of the Hamas military wing, apparently through tunnels that have not yet been discovered and demolished by the Egyptian army. Hamas is rejecting those allegations as an attempt to damage its relations with Cairo. The Islamic State, meanwhile, is threatening to overthrow Hamas rule of Gaza, criticizing the terror group for not being extreme enough. Professor Gil Troy discussed the situation in Gaza with IBA's Eli Wogelenter.
The situation in Gaza is highly unstable. We're now coming upon the 10 years of the disengagement, and we should emphasize that Gaza could have been a democracy, could have been a successful capitalist, thriving entity, that Gaza could have worked. They have a beautiful seacoast. They have fishing resources. They could have gone in a different direction. Instead, they went in the direction of trying to destroy our state rather than build their state. Hamas has been a consistent enemy of Israel and the Jewish people from the time they were founded. We also know that in many ways Hamas itself is a blowback from failed Israeli policies where they were trying to manipulate things back in the 1980s. So now Israel has a situation where, what's worse, Hamas or ISIS in Gaza? And it's very hard to predict. It's very hard to figure out how to go forward. My emphasis is on making sure that Israel's rights to protect itself are clear, and that Gaza stays as demilitarized and as contained as possible. I wish we could talk about some kind of kumbaya situation where we were going to have free trade and free passage and make Gaza into a Palestinian model of democracy. But they've got to show a willingness to do that as opposed to a willingness to kill each other and then try to kill us.
You talk about the issue of Israel being allowed to defend itself, but the fact is Israel is attacked all the time for defending itself. This week, the release of the UN Human Rights Council report blaming Israel for the deaths that happened in Gaza. What can Israel do to turn the tide of the perception against Israel that, in fact, Israel is allowed to defend itself? What can Israel do?
We're now coming on, in November, the 40th anniversary of the UN decision that Zionism is racism. And for the last 4 decades, we've seen a systematic campaign to delegitimize Israel, especially in the United Nations. The latest UN Human Rights Report is an example of that. If you look at the way the United States functioned in Iraq and Afghanistan, if you look at the way England functioned in Afghanistan, if you look at the way modern warfare is operated, Israel has set remarkable standards. When I visited military bases, I learned an Israeli word, dilemot, and all the fighter pilots talked about their dilemmas, because they don't want to kill civilians. They only want to, as they call it, neutralize terrorists. The fact that despite all of Israel's efforts, despite all the evidence we saw where Israel chose not to hit certain targets in order to limit collateral damage, what they called civilians killed, nevertheless, Israel is the one singled out, shows a systematic bias. Now, what's Israel to do? Israel has to do 3 things. 1, Israel must continue to defend itself. 2, Israel must continue to make sure that its pilots, its soldiers, its army is as moral as possible, not because of the other guy, not because of what the UN will say or not say, but because of our own souls and our own moral sensitivity. And similarly, number 3, just as we use remarkable creativity to try to solve every technological problem, every pharmaceutical problem known to humanity, we have to use that same ingenuity to try to figure out this political, diplomatic mess called the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't want Barack Obama leading the peace train. I don't want John Kerry driving the peace train. I want our leaders, Bibi Netanyahu and his coalition, driving the peace train, being in the lead, saying this is what we're going to do in order to, A, get stability, and B, ultimately get some kind of peace, whatever it looks like. And the passivity that we've seen on the side of our leadership is a small part, but still a part of the broader delegitimization movement. The bigger part is there's an animus against Israel, which no matter what we do, no matter how lovely we are, we're always going to be guilty. So I don't care about them. I'll fight them. I'll combat delegitimization on their terms. I want our internal politics and our internal moral story to be our own internal political and moral story. That's the Zionist way.
British Defense Secretary Michael Fallon told lawmakers at the House of Commons that they should consider expanding Royal Air Force airstrikes against the Islamic State to also include Syria. The United Kingdom has been participating in attacks against the radical group since a parliamentary vote last September. During his address, Fallon also made reference to the terror attack in Tunisia that claimed the lives of 3 British nationals, as well as those in Kuwait and France exactly 1 week ago, all of which were claimed by the Islamic State.
Of terror that offers a chilling reminder that the world we're living in has become a darker, more dangerous place, and that we are engaged in a fight that will last a generation. We know that ISIL is organised and directed from northern Syria. That's why the Prime Minister said during the debate last September on taking military action in Iraq that, and I quote, there is a strong case for us to do more in Syria. However, I will give way in a moment. However, the Prime Minister recognised then the reservations that some members of this House had, and we will not bring a motion to this House on which there is not some consensus. This is, of course, though, a new Parliament, and it is for all members to consider carefully how best to tackle ISIL, an evil caliphate that does not respect state boundaries.
Since the start of Muslim observance for the month-long Ramadan holiday, there has been a spike of worldwide terror attacks by the Islamic State and its allies. IBA's Efrat Patat discussed the surge with Dr. YORAM KAHATI of the Institute for Counter-Terrorism at Herzliyah's Interdisciplinary Center and asked him what the international community can do to combat global terror.
During the month of Ramadan, even though we have, the Muslims have their fasting, in fact, it is allowed to take or to carry out attacks during Ramadan. They have been encouraged, this organization, by their spokesman only a few days ago, because according to their view, during Ramadan, such attacks, in fact, give the person or the people who carried it out an advanced entry into paradise with everything that is connected with paradise. So in this case, such attacks in Ramadan, for those who believe in this, gives more good things or whatever things that are given in paradise compared to not doing it in other months. So in this case, it is something that in fact encouraged them to carry out such an attacks. And since the month only started, we should not be surprised if such attacks anywhere possible might continue in the coming weeks until Ramadan finishes.
Many global leaders and terror experts around the world believe that this is only the start of something new. Do you agree with this? And can the world really combat global terrorism?
Well, the process in its beginning, I also think so. In fact, it started, as I said, in the beginning of the century. And because it took some time for it to develop, and we are talking about an ideology and its implementation by various people, usually young, but not only, from all parts of the world, it's something that may take time because they are ready to sacrifice their lives as part of a jihad. In this case, we should not be surprised that such attacks will continue. And for that reason, the second part of your question, the only way to counter this terrorism is through the use of, or the broadening of cooperation between many or most of the states in the world, those who have been attacked and those who might be attacked in the future, in order to try this process, which may take a long time, to radicalize such people or to re-educate them in order to try to convince them, and it's difficult, how to achieve their aims or part of them, not through such terrorist attacks or violence. And this is a long process, and we don't have so far such cooperation between most of the world or only parts of the states.
There are still no breakthroughs between the United Nations nuclear watchdog organization and Iran over unresolved questions about atomic development in the Islamic Republic. That's the word today from Yukiya Amano, who heads the International Atomic Energy Agency, after his visit to Tehran for meetings with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and the Secretary of the country's Supreme National Security Council, Ali Shamkhani. Tehran and world powers are pushing for a final deal at nuclear talks in Vienna, under which it would agree to scale back atomic research in exchange for the lifting of international sanctions. The IAEA will play a critical role in monitoring and verifying the terms of any final deal. Iran, nevertheless, continues to stall the agency's investigation, running parallel to the political talks, into possible military dimensions of Tehran's nuclear work. Here at home, and as expected, former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert has filed an appeal to the Supreme Court to overturn his conviction for aggregated fraud in the Talansky affair. He also requested that the start of his 8-month prison term be delayed pending the outcome of the litigation. The May sentencing came in addition to the previous judgment that the former leader spent 6 years behind bars for committing bribery related to the Holy Land real estate case, which he is also appealing. The Special Military Court at the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv has accepted a plea bargain agreement for former Givati Battalion Commander Liran Hashbi, lowering his rank from lieutenant colonel to major, dismissing him from the Army, and suspending a 2-month term in military jail. The verdict follows Hashbi's guilty plea and conviction on 5 counts of inappropriate behavior, including instances that were sexual in nature against Mai Fatal, who was a female soldier under his command. 44-year-old Suhaila Fadila has gone where no Muslim woman has gone before her by becoming the country's first bus driver with her background. Female bus drivers are a rare sight here in the Middle East, but this mother of 4 has actively been doing so for the past 3 years. The resident of the Galilee Triangle town of Tira is a devout Muslim who wears a hijab and works for the METROPOLINE service, mostly driving the Beersheba-Tel Aviv route and other destinations in the southern and central parts of the country. When asked what inspired her, Fadila explained that she's always loved being behind the wheel, and when her driving instructor husband applied for a bus driver's license, she decided to do the same. She passed the test and the long training period while being the lone woman among her peers. The bus company says that soon, though, she should have some company.
He's the first Muslim bus driver, and I really hope so that our story will inspire others, especially among the Arab community in the village inside Israel. And this story is a very good example of how Jewish and Muslim can inspire and live in harmony in Israel.
In financial news, the shekel today ended the trading week with a mixed performance, and due to the closure of the stock market on Fridays, here's a look at the closing numbers for the week. The IBA weather team tells us that we can expect overnight cloudiness to gradually dissipate tomorrow, when we're also likely to feel a slight rise in temperatures. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow when I'll be back at this desk to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a great evening and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.